The Lord be with you. What a great way to start each of these sessions and blessing each other. And my assignment is to talk about the stewardship of the temple, the dwelling place of the Holy Spirit. I have provided this book, actually Grace Place Wellness, and there's some brochures about that your president mentioned. We're going to be doing retreats in 2020 and 2022 in your district. And I hope that you do talk with your congregation about them having the opportunity to send you on one of these 5-day, 5-night wellness adventures with us, wellness boot camps, if you will. I think that both you and your spouse and your congregation will benefit greatly. I come to this through Grace Place. Grace Place is a ministry that I and others formed about 20 years ago. My background is as a Lutheran and a physician who is Lutheran. When I finished my training in Chicago, I came back to my hometown of St. Louis and joined the only medical group that had another Lutheran doctor in it. And he happened to be Dr. Freddie Mortensen. Some of the older ones of you might have experienced Dr. Mortensen's care at the seminary. So Dr. Mortensen and I were the physicians for Concordia Seminary, St. Louis, for about 20 years, staffing their little health clinic. And our practice was right next to the Vatican in St. Louis, the International Center, and we actually took care of an enormous number of professional church workers, both in the parishes in St. Louis and also at the International Center. My observation over practicing medicine for 40 years, and I was predominantly, I did gastroenterology, hepatology, and nutrition, but I was primarily a country doctor in Missouri. You know, I really was an internist and had a lot of primary care. My observation was that ministry can be a stressful place. Wow, is that a unique observation? But that it displayed that sort of intense stresses and strains in physical, emotional, financial, vocational, relational, and spiritual ways. And so the origin of Grace Place was to try to look at a way to devotionally live and serve. Isn't that a unique term? We've just been actually, just come from a conference at Concordia Seminary in St. Louis, the Fall Pastors Conference, where I talked about this as well. But devotionally living out your discipleship and your calling through the wellness wheel that many of you have seen. It's on the back of the book as well. These various wheels or aspects of living, beginning with our new life, our new creation in Christ, through our spiritual life, and through these various spokes of wellness. These are opportunities to live devotionally. So these are what we would call active ways to live out your devotion to Christ. And at the same time, within our retreat setting, learning about these active devotional disciplines, if you will, there's also opportunity to be contemplative, that we design the retreat each day around the 4 hours of prayer, some of which are meditative, saturated in the Word of God. So it's both that active devotional living and contemplative devotional life. We're going to talk about the care of the temple. Now, St. Paul talks about a couple ideas about the temple. One, of course, is the congregation, and also thinking about yourselves as pastors and pastors' spouses as, in a sense, a congregation caring for each other in your calling walks, in your daily life. So we think about that from Corinthians 3, and again, just thinking about this incredible creation that God has made in our being. I'm really going to talk about, as your theme, health and wellness of the track team, okay? You guys are the track team. You gals are the track team. And that's what I want to focus our discussion on today. So here's one of the more interesting studies that I've seen, sort of a compilation of the literature about well-being in pastors. And it says, the health of any organization's workforce is important to its overall success and productivity. And by the way, the church gets no religious exemption from this requirement. You know, and we may have some theological issues with that. In fact, I want to talk about it within the theology of ministry and God's intention for his creation. That I believe that that statement has great validity. The church gets no religious exemption from this requirement of taking care of, not selfishly, but selflessly taking care of the temple. So God creates us, as we would say, imperishable. He creates creation imperishably, and the marvelous cosmos that he created, and he placed his most prized creation within that. But that most prized creation, us, develops doubt. In fact, doubt leading to sin. Those of you who might have had Robert Kolb as professor, great Luther scholar at the seminary, and he says that he thinks original sin was doubt. An interesting thing to think about. Within that doubt and within that sin, then, we become perishable, and the cosmos itself becomes perishable until God comes incarnate in body, spirit, soul, mind, comes to be and live and dwell among us, fully man, fully God. Restores us by his death, restores our relationship with the Father, and then will come again to heal all creation, taking us back to being imperishable, taking the cosmos back to being imperishable. Well, what have I just recited in a sort of update way? The Apostles' Creed, you know, the creeds. And that's really the basis for this theology of care, not selfishly, but selflessly, of ourselves. God creates us to be whole beings from the point of conception, body, soul, heart, mind, spirit. And as we talk these next 2 days, Dr. Hartung and myself, I'm going to really be focusing on sort of that physical, cognitive aspect of well-being, and Reverend Hartung on the emotional and spiritual aspects. But I want to make this very fundamental point, that we can't separate ourselves. The beauty of us as a creation of God is that we are whole, we are integrated, we are interdependent within ourselves and with all of God's cosmos. And that when something happens to us physical, we develop heart disease or cancer, it undoubtedly will affect our emotions, our spirit, our thought, our spiritual life. When we have a spiritual issue that we're struggling with, it has an influence, an effect on our physical being. We can't separate those out. And so as we think about the care, the stewardship of this temple, and it is in fact stewardship of this gift for living and serving, when we think about that, I want to think about this wholeness and this interdependence of the various elements of being. So, clergy physical health. A couple points. Number one, generally, clergy, and I'll pretty much apply this to clergy wives, clergy share the general health issues that almost all of us in this country share, particularly obesity, unfortunately. At least a third of Americans are 30 pounds or more over their appropriate weight for size. 30%. It's gradually increasing. The statistics that I've seen by the next 25 years is if we don't make changes, that well over 50% of our population will be sharing in that. Clergy in general tend to be more prone to increased blood sugar, elevated blood pressure, and elevated cholesterol. Why is that? Anybody have any thoughts? Why is that? Sitting? Stress. You know, a lot of us are Central European, where that is a big issue, that is a big problem, but it's also true in our African American population and some of our Asian population as well. So, but as a group, this is a physical characteristic of clergy. Generally, as we look at our workforce, our clergy workforce, the younger pastors tend to be physically healthy. Well, that kind of makes sense. Physically healthier than the older population. The older population of pastors tend to be emotionally healthier than the younger of our pastors. Isn't that interesting? Somebody's learning something as they get older. Someone has fought struggles and battles and has grown and learned. But I think what it points out to me is the importance of things like PALS, mentoring, all of those things that David Kinnaman was kind of talking about, that your district president, Gibson, has been talking about as well. The importance of helping and growing and nurturing and caring for each other. And finally, clergy actually tend to smoke less, drink less, exercise more, and tend to use safety precautions more than the general population. They tend to wear seatbelts more, even in the days before we had this thing beeping and screaming at us to put our seatbelts on. What do you think that means? Yeah? Yeah? I think it means, by the way, this is my picture prior to my two little grandchildren being born this past year, where I had to shave my locks in order to be acceptable. But what I think it means is that if you provide best practices for clergy wellness, they will try to follow it. Now, believe me, as a physician, that's an awesome piece of information. That's an awesome piece of information, that if you give clergy and their families best practices, they're going to try to follow them as best they can. And so that's what we're going to kind of talk about today. One other point about physical health. Our perishable beings are not the masters and the owners of creation. We're the temple stewards. And I think that that's an important aspect to remember, that we are taking this idea of stewardship obviously outside of just the financial realm, but into every aspect, into stewarding relationships, stewarding our emotional life, stewarding our vocations, all of those aspects of well-being. So the master physician, Jesus Christ, invites us to live abundantly, and since we've used this word resiliency, I think it actually kind of works pretty well with maybe a 21st century way to think about the abundance, but resiliency. The Spirit is building stewardship within your life to care again selflessly rather than selfishly for the temple of the Holy Spirit. Well-living, well-serving, well-caring, as we know from Corinthians. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of Med School 101. By the way, you may play a doctor on television after we're done this morning. So can all of you get your doctor poses, practice your doctor poses, you know, that little commercial. But I want to take you through a few points about physical well-being. Resilience. We've heard that word repeatedly from David Kinnaman and in the book and from myself. What does that mean? I'm kind of a pretty simple guy. I need pretty simple illustrations to kind of really understand a concept, and I use just this simple picture of a spring. What do we know about a spring? You know, we're all springs. We have here spring used in a different sense in the scriptures, but a spring is able to adapt to stresses, to change. It has the ability to adapt, compress, expand, contract, but then to return to a functional state. What we call, the medical term is homeostasis. To return to a functional state. May not look exactly the same. If you've dealt with a spring and really stretch it too far, it may not exactly get back to its previous shape, but it's functional. It does what it was created to do. Homeostasis means that we return to set points, points of best function. And so a set point is sort of the desired target or value for an essential variable. It's a cybernetic term. And in fact, the human creation is a cybernetic organism. That means that it involves feedback and communication and control to adapt to stress and to return to a set point, a point of best function. Just some examples physically. Think about body temperature. Okay, what's the normal body temperature, appropriate? What happens if we get an infection? It goes up, it changes. Or we get into an extraordinarily cold environment, it may contract. But the point is that it comes back. God has created us so incredibly, and by the way, this is mind-boggling, soul-boggling, that God would create us to live within the cosmos in this narrow little envelope of this little planet with the appropriate sunlight, water, all to maintain that our body functions best at this narrow little range of 98.6. That it can adapt to stresses, but it returns to that best function point. What about wound healing? Anyone been operated on? Yeah, or cut your finger or whatever. You have a scar. What's the scar there for? It's to be homeostatic. It's to keep the bad stuff out and keep the good stuff in. And the scar may not look perfect. It may not look beautiful. It may not look like what was there in the first place, but it functions. It functions to keep the bad stuff out and the good stuff in. So that's the homeostatic sense of resilience physically. Just a little piece of science for those of you who are STEM followers, we're learning something very interesting about the humans in the Human Genome Project, which is occurring predominantly at Washington University in St. Louis, but my alma mater, but also at many other places around the country. So all of us have billions of cells within our body. And within every cell, we have a control center, a control panel called the nucleus. And within that nucleus, we have blueprints in the forms of chromosomes. By the way, I see some of you starting to sweat if you think back to now biology or physics. I see actual sweat developing on some forehead. I'm not going to go all the way there. Anyway, we've got these sets of chromosomes, and at the tips of the chromosomes are little special control points called telomeres. These telomeres are packed with DNA, with very specific blueprints that have to do with things like immunity, with aging, with development of heart disease, different forms of arthritis, those sorts of things. What we see in young chromosomes is that these telomeres, these endpoints, are quite long. But as we age, these telomeres, these control points, become smaller and smaller. We are now learning things that we can physically do to avoid those telomeres from shrinking. However, once they have diminished, they tend to then stay diminished. We can't regrow the telomeres. So you'll be starting to see more and more about this as we start to understand the aging process in more depth. So that's a little bit about physical well-being. What about cognition? What do I mean by cognition? because I consider it part of our physical being. It's our general intellect, our memory, the way that we hear or see things, our visual and auditory perceptions, ability to use language and to solve problems. What happens to cognition, for example, as we age? And there's a lot in the book about that. We actually have two categories of cognition. We have crystallized cognition and fluid cognition. And there's lots of individual variations as we age. Crystallized cognition or intelligence means things that we learn, familiar skills that we've obtained through education or practice. And actually, as we get older, our crystallized intelligence remains fairly strong. We also have fluid intelligence, nonverbal reasoning, problem-solving, motor skills, which actually declines as we get older. And I hate these sort of graphs, but just to share this with you, on the vertical axis is performance, horizontal axis age. As we get older, again, you can see, starting age 25 and 70 as marking points. As we get older, our crystallized, our intelligence as cultural knowledge actually increases, but our ability to solve problems, to make basic decisions, actually diminishes rather dramatically after we hit age 25 or 30. In all of us, again, individual variations. So how old do you want your surgeon to be? If he's going to crack your chest or crack your belly or whatever. 40 to 60. You know, right in that, honestly, right in that age range, because problem-solving ability, skills, the ability, the communication between the brains and the hands, all those sort of things are, it's a sort of a funny joke among physicians, but there's a lot of truth to that. Again, I say I like things simple. Here's another way to look at our cognition as we age. On the right is the young brain. So you can see there's lots of communication going on. There's lots of color. There's lots of energy, even though there are individual little pockets of people learning things and communicating. On the left is the old brain. There's just as much intelligence, there's just as much data stored in there, but we can't communicate it from one place to the other. All of you know this. As you get older, your ability, you see somebody at a pastor's conference, you know them, you know their face, you know all these things about them, but you just can't find their name. It's just, those highways of communication, to get them to our verbal sense or auditory visual sense are blocked by all sorts of tangles of nerves that are actually dying and getting solidified. So really that's sort of in a simple way to think about our cognitive health between younger brains and older brains. To successfully adapt, to spring back, just to make this comment about us cognitively, to adverse situations, there's some things that really seem to help. Now, I know there's all these brain games out there and computerized programs and internet programs, but there's actually 4 or 5 things that actually really do help us cognitively as we age. One is to have a positive attitude and to be optimistic. If you think about your life and you think about your situation and your ministry and your marriage and your relationship with your kids, if you can keep that from the concept of half full rather than half empty, if you can be positive and optimistic, it actually preserves and helps your brain remain young. If you can learn, and I think perhaps this might be to some extent why older pastors are emotionally seem to be healthier than some younger ones, the capacity to regulate your emotions in stressful situations actually does keep your cognition healthier and younger. And if you can learn and understand that troubles and stresses and strains are opportunities for growth to make good wine, this generally is very helpful in helping to maintain your cognitive youth, your cognitive health. I want to share a little diagram with you and ask you to sort of pick out there where you might be. You know, this is actually kind of an informative level. I don't know that all you pastors are holding a big bucket of money over there. But where are you? Where are you on that? Just take a moment to look at that. You know, where are you now? Would you like to be somewhere else? Yeah. I kind of still find myself somewhere in the middle of that whole process there. Not quite at the need of a crutch, but hanging out in the middle. And actually, I'm pretty happy with where I am. You know, it's kind of growing where you're planted at this point in your life and understanding, you know, what the value of our given different ages are. What happens to us as we age? And in fact, do we have any influence on you? Can you really control what happens to your body or what happens to your mind as you get older? Well, I want to talk about losing wellness in all its various aspects then, and make this point. Wellness is, in our culture, has become a religion. You know, if you look at what's on the media, what the conversation is, what young people are talking about, the reality is that wellness has become, in a sense, a spiritual effort, a new religion. The problem is that it's focused at self above, it's focused at me above we, and it is involved in consumerism. Almost all of today's wellness seems to be coming out of buy this, buy that, buy the new running shoes, buy the Fitbit, you know, join the gym that's expensive that has all the equipment. Do we not need a Christ-centered, biblically based voice, a gospel voice about wellness in a culture that is so focused on wellness out of consumerism? Yes, we do. I will tell you, yes, we do. And I think that you all know and realize that. Well, can we do anything about this wellness? What is it that determines wellness? How many of you think that genetics is the predominant determinant in your life about wellness? What percentage might you guess is due to genetics? 2%. 2%? 40%? 15%? The reality is, looking at what's called the Danish twin studies, they've done a 100-year study on identical twins in the Scandinavian countries, and what they found is roughly 20 to 40% of the illnesses that you will display and the things that will lead to your death are genetically based predominantly, which means nutrition, movement, and the tribe, the people you grow up with, you live with, you work with, has to do with 60 to 80%. So the answer to that is yes, you can do something about the way that you age. Not that you age, we're all going to age because of sin. Not that you age, but the way that that process takes place. I want to share with you this study. You might be familiar with it. It's called the Blue Zones, done by the National Geographic. It's actually the first good study on longevity and wellness in 500 years, believe it or not. And the National Geographic team went throughout 296 cultures throughout the world to look at where are people not just living the longest, but living the healthiest. Less cancer, less Alzheimer's disease, less diabetes, less heart disease, all of those sorts of things. And they found 5 places: Okinawa, southern tip of Japan; Sardinia, Italy, a mountainous portion of Italy; Ikaria, Greece, again, a very mountainous region in Greece. Nicoya, Costa Rica, a peninsula in Costa Rica, and one place in the United States. Loma Linda. Loma Linda. Why Loma Linda? Why would Loma Linda be like these other? Exactly. The Seventh-day Adventists who follow a vegetarian diet predominantly, who observe strictly a day of rest as the Lord commanded us to do, time of rest, time of family, being with family. Those are part of the Seventh-day Adventist lifestyle. And of all these cultures in the world, they found in Loma Linda people living longer, healthier lives. Very fascinating. So in medicine, we have what we call pearls of wisdom. If any of you have sons or daughters that are doctors or nurses or in the medical profession, you know that we teach each other through the passing on of these pearls of wisdom. We call them pearls of wisdom. So they're truths, really, that we share from older physician to younger physician, from older nurse to younger nurse. And I want to share with you 5 pearls of wisdom that come out of the blue zones. Number 1, movement. Movement. Tim Allman talked about that yesterday. Movement. And that doesn't mean necessarily exercise, but continuously setting up your lifestyle so that you have action, that you have movement, as opposed to sitting and being sedate. I'll share with the wives in this lunch where I'm going to speak. The 20th century plague was smoking for our country. The 21st century plague is sitting. It has made a dramatic change within the health and well-being of our world. Number 2, plant slant, I would call it. A plant slant, predominantly vegetable diet. Number 3, downshifting throughout the day. Regular times of downshifting, of slowing down your blood pressure and your pulse, of slowing down the release of stress hormones, cortisol, glucose, all of those things that are released within our system that respond to stresses and strains. Taking times regularly to slow down. Living within your tribe, with closeness within your tribe, with those that you love, and mutually caring for each other within that setting. And finally, waking up each day with an understanding of your mission and purpose. These 5, you know what the number 1 health risk of people 65 in the United States is? Retirement. Waking up without purpose. You know, it's an incredible statistic. So these are the 5 areas: movement, plant diet, time for downshifting, keeping closeness within those you love around you, and waking up with purpose. Let's take a look at these and pearls of wisdom now for our track team, all of you, as we would apply that. Number 1, movement. Any kind of movement is terrific. And having exercise and making that a part of your day is absolutely wonderful and essential. I want to just give you the pearls of that. We need to be walking, running, moving actively to the point where we're a little bit short of breath, where we can't totally carry on a comfortable conversation. That's what I mean by exercising at that level. About 150 minutes a week. 30 minutes 5 times a week, 15 minutes 10 times a week, whatever that might be. For cardiovascular and pulmonary and lung health, we probably should be exercising 150 minutes per week. But building movement into your lifestyle where you have an opportunity of walking as opposed to taking an elevator or escalator. Put walking as make that choice, make that wellness choice. Very important. And when you do recreate, never to try to use the golf carts, and I know that's tough out here, but try to walk. And you really, as a rule of thumb, another pearl, don't sit for 45 minutes more than a setting of 45 minutes. In that spirit, stand up. Stand up. Seventh inning stretch. I don't know if I'll knock my microphone off. Deep breath in. As you inhale, lift your arms up. Exhale. Cross your hands in front of you. Inhale all the way up. Exhale. One more time. Deep breath in. Try to knock each other out. Let your arms rest at your side. Put your chin down. And we're going to move to the left and back, right and forward. Just hit those corners rather than rotating. 3 times around, back, right, forward, then reverse. To the right, back, left, forward, right, back, left, forward. One more time. Now move that motion down to your hips. Hula hoop around. Get that lower back. 3 times around clockwise. And reverse. And reverse. All right, and wake your brains up. All right. Don't sit for more than 45 minutes at a time. Get up and move around. It is great for your whole being. I'm going to talk much more at lunchtime about diet with your wives. So those of you who have your wives with you will understand that you're going to be living a lot longer. You may not be as happy if you can't have a hamburger every once in a while, but you're going to live longer, and that's what's important. Just looking biblically, we were actually created, I believe, to be vegetarians. When you look at Genesis 3, when God's talking about nutrition, he says, in the garden I've given you this fruit and the seeds of that fruit, and that's going to be your nutrition. The reality is that we aren't given meat to eat as nutrition until Noah, until the flood. How old was Noah when the flood happened? 600 years old. A vegetarian diet works. The guy lived 600 years. Okay, so God gives him meat. How long does he live after the flood? He lives to be 950. It cut his life in half. Just by giving him a pork steak, But God really created us. He created this structure, this physical being, to be primarily driven by fruits and vegetables. And just again, a little pearl, a physical pearl, about what does it mean, we're supposed to have 5 servings of fruits and vegetables, or 13 servings. Now they actually say 13 servings of fruits and vegetables each day. What does that mean? A serving is about a half a cup of a green or orange fruit or vegetable, about a half a cup of dried beans. And by the way, beans are probably one of the healthiest foods that you can eat, even though a lot of us don't tolerate that so well. But the reality is, in those 5 regions where people were living long and healthy lives, they were consuming at least a cup of beans a day, and perhaps a cup of leafy vegetables. Extraordinarily important. What about downshifting? The third sort of pearl, downshifting. And we know from the Psalms, be still and know that I am God. There's 13 or 14 examples of Christ downshifting in this sense in the Scriptures. Going away to be with his Father, to be in conversation. Going away to be with his friends, with his disciples. Downshifting, getting away from the crowds, and how extraordinarily important it is. And that time in all of our lives, and particularly in your life, can be spent in the Word. That can be an opportunity for you to inwardly digest, to sit contemplatively, meditatively with God's Word. And when you do that, if I would put a blood pressure cuff on you or a pulsometer, I would find your blood pressure going down, your pulse rate going down, your blood sugar going down. cortisol in your bloodstream, epinephrine, all of those things diminishing. It's extraordinarily important. The importance of, I call it tribe. That's the word that the people from National Geographic use. But it's your group of people that are holding you up, that are lifting your arms in ministry, that are lifting your family's arms, that are part of your family. And I would hope that our church, this has been really a commitment of my life, to understand well pastors and well families. That's why Grace Place is a family program. It's a husband and wife, and we actually do retreats for the whole family, involving the children as well. Well pastors in a well family, and well pastors in well congregations. The largest area of growth in what we're doing at Grace Place is to do congregational retreats, where we come into your congregation, meet with your leadership group or with anyone who wants to attend over a 2-day period, and actually go through this Lutheran wellness wheel as it applies to the congregation. I think a critical part of that is also this idea of mutual care committees. Bruce Hartung writes a lot about that in his books. I've written about it in one of my earlier books about vocation and wellness. This committee of people who's outside of the board of elders, a committee of people who the pastor has a great voice in choosing who those 2, 3, 4 people are, who the pastor can have a frank and personal conversation with, open his heart with, and they can be mutually accountable to help the pastor as well. So the importance, if you want to learn more about that, pick up Bruce's book or one of my books, or I'm sure there's information through your district health group about learning about these mutual care committees within your congregation. Very, very important. And finally, purpose. Well, I think that all of us understand purpose. Isn't it there? There we go. Right, it's obviously the cross. But to think about it in terms of Luke 10, don't rejoice that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. The rejoice is not in the process of ministry, the vocation of ministry, but the fact that you're a child of God, that He has your name written, your baptismal name written within His heart. The hardest thing about all this wellness stuff is starting. And so as I close, I want to talk a little bit about the starting process. This is where I have found myself. We have exits like that in Missouri. It's not just in California, How do you get started? It really involves a readiness for change. You don't just go out and get the track shoes and start on the track. It doesn't work, right? All of you know that. Any of you who have, and all of you have been involved in dieting or exercising or whatever it might be. The first issue is understanding that you might have a problem. That the problem is not just that your wife is nagging at you, or your kids are complaining about you, or someone else is telling you that you might have an issue, but understanding that the problem starts right here. That's actually the first step in change. Then we go through what I call sort of analysis paralysis. There's sort of a stalling process where we think of all the reasons why we should and shouldn't start our health process, and we really actually stall like an airplane in that mode. Finally, we kind of do what I would call the dry run. It's preparing for battle. I'm going to get done talking today, and you might go grab something to eat. You might have a vegetable serving on there. And you want to go outside and walk, so you go out and perhaps walk around the grounds here. and then maybe you'll sit for the rest of the afternoon. I don't know what that will look like. But we kind of all do sort of a little dry run. Let's see what it's all about. And finally, we get to the time is now. It's action. We're going to actually get involved in making a change within our lives. And the problem is that we have to realize that relapses always occur when we're trying to change behavior, even if we've made it to that action step where we've really decided that we're committed to making that change. We kind of go through a maintenance time where we try to prevent those relapses back to our previous lifestyle. And then finally, we do let go of old self. The problem with almost every consumerism health strategy that's out there is it starts there. It starts with the action step. It's not going to work. I can give you that guarantee as a physician, as a human being, and all of you know that. You have to actually start with understanding the problem, going through these various stages until you can actually create change. Very important. So, temple wellness. We have been given this body, mind, and spirit as a gift of God, gifted by the Creator, restored by the Son, matured by the Spirit. And I really want to leave you with this thought that this is a stewardship, the stewardship of all those aspects of our being that God gifts us with, taking care of them again so that we can fulfill that living and serving, that abundance, that resilience that Christ has won for us. Again, all of this stuff is in the book. I would really urge you to go ahead and spend some time looking through that, if you will. And I'm happy to take some questions just for a minute. I've got maybe 5 minutes to speak. Any questions? Yes? Absolutely. David Ludwig has led many of our retreats over the years. So most of by the way, we've retreated well over 10,000 LCMS pastors and teachers. We do them for teachers, DCEs, deacons, deaconesses, anyone who's in professional church work. The team is made up of myself as a physician and a pastor who leads a great deal of the programming. David Ludwig many of you know David from Hickory, North Carolina, has led it now. It's Daryl Zimmerman. I hope many of you have had a chance and will have a chance to meet with Daryl. And Daryl, in fact, we are doing 2 retreats, I hope, here in 2020 and 2022 within your district, and Daryl will be out here. Daryl also does the congregational-based retreats. David is doing quite well. David lives fully resiliently, as you know. Yes? Yeah. So coffee, like a lot of these health things, has times of great celebration, that it's all healthy for us, and times when we think that it's causing harm. And there's, of course, individual variability. I think, again, in moderation, there's nothing wrong with coffee. It's probably, honestly, better for you physically black than it is to put whipping cream or half and half in it, And again, more natural sweeteners, if you have to have that, like stevia or those sorts of things, honey, for example. But I think there actually are some evidence that it may prevent diabetes or delay the onset of diabetes. Again, in moderation. I know some of the studies are saying you should have 16 cups of black coffee a day. It's always risk and benefits. But I think to have a morning cup of coffee is probably a good thing. Perhaps better is to have a morning cup of tea. And I think that there are great health benefits to having a good cup of tea and water in the morning. Very essential. So hydration, very essential. Saw some, yeah.
So have you seen or talked to anybody else who has tried to implement in their own congregations, in council meetings or elders meetings, say, okay, now we have a policy that after 45 minutes we take a break, stand up, stretch, and has that gone over well?
Well, I mean, well, look at Lutheran worship. Hey, you know, sadly, you know, because I'm talking at in all sorts of denominations. There's a lot of denominations actually that are sitting through everything, including the reading of the gospel. But you know, part of our Lutheran worship is, I think, in a great sense, is this whole body experience. But no, it's just wonderfully important when even if you're having elders meetings or whatever, to get in our school system to have our kids up and about stretching, never to get rid of recess, you know, those important, which I lived for, by the way, you know, really important for that movement. Yeah, absolutely. Get back here.
Can you comment on the choice of vegan diet in relation to meat or protein and so on? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there are people that take everything to the radical phase, and you can actually be very healthy if you're purely vegan. You can get proteins through beans, through nuts, through other sorts of leafy vegetables. So you can get enough protein, and you can do it very healthfully. Even women who are going through pregnancy, by the way, my next book is about raising healthy children. How do you, as a Christian, from a Christian perspective, coming out next summer from CPH. But even women who are vegan in their lifestyles and with their children can actually raise very healthy kids. So it can be done. There are definitely ways to get adequate protein. I think for most of us, that's probably not the healthiest or not the happiest of diets, and that we like our protein, particularly in this country, and we like our protein in the form of some form of meat. I'll talk with the wives today about, you know, lean meats and the types of meats, fish, those sorts of products that can really provide us great health. Yeah, yes.
The undeniable benefits, why does relapse seem so inevitable?
Well, relapse happens because we're sinful, I suppose. Honestly, you know, saint sinner. I mean, that is part of our sinful nature as a human being, I think it is a part of our natural world until Christ comes again and heals our cosmos. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't know that information. I mean, there are substantial genetic influences on Alzheimer's. We know there's a category within. Alzheimer's is actually a spectrum. You know, as we're understanding things as a spectrum, there are some people who are very genetically prone, where almost everyone is going to get it, and it's helpful for us in terms of thinking about therapies. But there's lots of people with crossover dementias of various kinds where there's no question that diet, lack of exercise, other health illnesses, substance abuse, all of those things that are contributing substantially. And not just substance abuse, but daily medications that are leading to great cognitive dysfunction. So,
All right, can you guys give Dr. Eckrich a hand?
all right, thanks.